Friday event that we've been doing for quite a few years now, sponsored by the Practice Council. We've had a wonderful array of presenters over the years. And this year, for maybe the first time, I'm organized enough to say that we have 2 more scheduled, and they're really outstanding, as well as the amazing launch we're going to have today. But on Friday, October 29th, Kelly Kinnison, the director of the Division of Family and Community Policy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation in HHS. She's most likely the highest placed community psychologist in government. And she used to run and manage all the food programs. And she'll be joining us on the 29th. And then on the 12th of November, we have Teresa Armstead, who's a senior health scientist at the Centers for Disease Control and also an amazing person. So we've got 2 terrific government people, and everybody's always asking, what do community psychologists do in government? And we're going to learn. I'm going to turn this over to Susan to do the introduction, because she knows Kamala and has worked with her. But I have to say, I am delighted that we are going to have Kamala. I had a chance to talk with her, and we're in for a fascinating midday. Susan.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. Kamala is from San Francisco. She's an evaluator. I am not going to go into everything that was already written in her bio, because you're probably here because you read that. I just want to say that she is an amazing collaborator. And I had the joyful experience along with Ann Price, who just showed up, and another colleague of ours, Jen Valentine, to work with her on a proposal, and already learned, just working on the proposal, learned so much from her. I was a little disappointed. We almost got it, but didn't. And I was very disappointed that I didn't get the chance to work with her, because I think I could have learned so much. And I think today you're all going to learn so much from her as well. So welcome, Kamala. We're really excited to have you here, and I'll let you get started.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the warm introduction, and it's very exciting to see all the experience in the room. So I think, yeah, I have a very brief presentation here, but I thought it'd be nice to just start off with some intention for this meeting today. So however it is that you may show up, if you're on your lunch break or you decide to take a little time to be with us, that's welcome. If you have any pets, if you're feeling great, or if you're not feeling at your best, that's also okay. I'm just happy to be in this space with you, be able to share this time with you. And this is really about you all. I was very excited, and I kind of told Tom that being able to tell a little bit of my story in some ways is also very therapeutic for me, and how I became a firm, and why I felt the need to be very explicit about the fact that we were a firm by and for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and what that means. And so, as I said, I'm going to share a small presentation here, so you guys have an idea of some of the content. And then I'm going to let you all guide some of that conversation, or at least vote on what areas I should spend the most time on. Okay. So give me just a moment here. I think, yay, I'm a co-presenter. Okay. For now, we see Susan. All right, so let's see. Here's some content that I thought we could talk about today. And like I said, this is really fluid and kind of flexible based on what this group wants. I know we don't have a very set sort of time for each piece of this presentation and questions. And so some of the topics that I thought could be helpful is maybe, one, give you a little background about me, just in general. Talking also about how to navigate a very white evaluation sector, what it feels like, what are some of the challenges I've come across, and then what are the learnings that I've taken from times that we've failed communities. And when I say we, I mean me as well, because I've also been a part of those processes. I can also spend some time talking about how I built out my evaluation firm, what were a lot of the values that sort of shaped building that firm and that I feel kind of differentiates us from firms that feel more comfortable operating in a white normative culture. And then finally, I can also talk about different tips to be culturally responsive in your own practice and in your own firms. And I'm very excited about the variety of folks that are here in the room, experiences, age groups, everything. So if you would then, in the chat, I would love it if you could put a number in there. I know you probably want to hear from multiple of these, but if you could put a number in the chat, either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of where you would like me to focus more time and energy, that would be just so helpful in shaping this presentation. I'm going to give a little more time because I want to hear from everybody in the chat. Oh, here comes the suspense. I wasn't able to see it at first, so let's see where we are. So, Susan, can I call on you to be, to sort of help me tally a bit? I'm going to start off by just talking about myself, and maybe you could private message me or send me a message in the group once we have a sense. Cool. So I'll be brief on the About Me section. I'll just tell you what I think is relevant to building out my firm. So yeah, as I kind of stated in my bio, I was born and raised in San Francisco. I grew up in a multicultural home, which I think was really a privilege because I was raised between 2 cultures and 2 religions. So my mom is Catholic and Colombian. My father is Malaysian and Hindu. And I identify a lot of times as racially ambiguous or Indian because people see me and assume that I'm Indian. And that has shaped a lot of my practice too, because as I got into, I always knew I wanted to be in a social impact field. And as I got into the work, I realized that the person who is serving communities also matters. And the stories that are told about communities matter. And that's what I see a lot in research and evaluation is it's important to reflect the folks that we're collecting data about or that we're reporting on or that we bring in their direct feedback if we are not of one of their communities. And this goes, I think race, ethnicity is important here, but I would even say beyond that, you know, thinking of other areas of our lives or parts of our identity that offer us more privilege or offer us more perspective or less privilege, if you will. So I bring that up because I think there tends to be, I think amongst folks who already have experienced to a certain extent the effects of racism, I believe that we have a very strong sense of a power or a lack thereof, and we can use this understanding to be able to shape our programs, to make them more responsive, to make them more participatory, and the same thing we can do across research and evaluation. And so basically, that's my background. I studied international relations with my master's in international development. So you can see I am very interested in working cross-culturally and doing it in the most culturally responsive way as I can. And awesome, we're gonna look at this. What do we have? So mostly 3 and 5. Okay, awesome. Learning from the times we failed. Oh, I know, that's a popular one. I wrote a blog post actually on my Play for Change website, and that one got the most hits of all, which was around the failures that have kind of shaped our practice. Great, so I will keep that in mind. We want to know more about learning from failures and then the action piece, right? How do we become more culturally responsive? Perfect. So I'll just start by saying navigating a traditionally white evaluation sector. And so that can be kind of hard to quantify, but if you think in very broad strokes in our sector, a lot of the folks who are coming out and, developing the theories of our field, who are shaping the way the field is going, what you would call experts and academics, the people who we're all following are sort of champions of the field. The fact that you look in textbooks on evaluation, and most of the folks that are listed are from white communities. So that already kind of puts a lens on the work that you're doing. And then I will say the folks who get really passionate about or end up being in the field, who tend to attend conferences, the number of evaluation firms that are owned by white folks as opposed to folks of color. So that's where you're seeing a lot of the differences. And yet a lot of research and evaluation work happens within communities of color. And so some challenges that I faced early in my career, and this is working for both domestic and international firms, was trying to show the value that came with working with people from specific cultures and allowing them to sort of shape the research. So that was one of the bigger challenges. It was also challenging for me to design surveys. There's always that survey question that I dread that's on race, ethnicity, where you have to choose if you want to be Asian or if you want to be Latina this time. And so that can always be a very burdensome kind of experience. And so all of that, I kind of just carried a booklet of best practices and practices that I felt should have been better. So not so great practices or challenging times, and used that booklet to shape my practice nowadays. And some of the larger lessons that we've learned, or that I feel the times that we failed communities, I think were around a disconnect with the culture. So one of those bigger failures, I would say, from an international standpoint, if some of you folks are already working internationally or looking to work internationally, a lot of times to be able to save costs in those evaluation budgets, we clip some corners, when it comes to being culturally responsive. And so I've been on data collection teams where we work with local translators, where perhaps we from the West are the ones to conduct interviews or conduct focus groups. And then we have local translators sort of translating and interpreting on the spot and giving their own sort of views as well. And what I found from these experiences is sometimes there's been a disconnect because first, when you don't provide these services in people's native language or their primary language, that can already lead to a level of distance, which makes the person feel further away from you and from the study that you're doing, and perhaps more protective, a little more scared, a little less likely to open up, than if you were to be able to communicate in their language. I'd say too, another issue with that, with having that translation interpretation relationship happen in that way, is that sometimes you'll see that the interpreters will come from a higher economic status. Perhaps if they speak multiple languages, then they have higher levels of education, a lot of experience, which is valuable on that end, but can feel kind of disconnected, especially if you're talking with communities that are impoverished or that are feeling other sorts of vulnerabilities. So one of the big failures that I've had was around just realizing that I wasn't as impactful in communities if I didn't speak their language, or I wasn't intentional about making sure that our data collection was happening in their native language. And so that was something that really marked my life. I'd say another area where we've struggled before is having community buy-in. And so we all love this talk around community buy-in, but what does it actually mean, right? To what level are folks engaged in the programming that you're doing? And so one of the challenges I see in our sector, and the times we failed before, has been around instead of allowing a community to approach you and say, I would love to know more about this, or I would love to answer these types of questions with a research and evaluation effort, we come forward telling them what it is that they should be asking about, or what it is that they should do. And so this isn't as much an evaluation, but the example I'm going to give you is from a program implementation project, because before I was an evaluator, I was actually implementing a lot of these programs on the ground. And so I was working with a nonprofit, I remember, to build an eco-village in a very urban and very low income neighborhood of Bogota in Colombia. And I remember we were a group of maybe 20 or so volunteers. And at the time I felt on top of the world. I was so excited. It was my first time doing a project of this sort. And I remember coming out and looking around, and all I saw were volunteers taking part in the build. And so I loved the eco part. It was very neat to build bricks out of water bottles and cement and, use resources that you have around us. That part was incredible. But I remember from that time, I was asking, why aren't folks in the neighborhood kind of helping build this home that we're trying to make? And I remember the response was, oh, well, that wasn't really part of the plan. We're supposed to be donating our time or our money to them. And so it's this model of give the fish as opposed to teach to fish, or it's just this model that doesn't really provide the best results, I think. And so what happened was, there's this wonderful picture where we started building the eco village and we actually never finished it. We didn't have the time. I don't know if it was the weather or if there were other issues that came in between us and accomplishing that goal. But I think a big part was there wasn't much community buy-in. I think I can remember in the back of my mind, this was so many years ago, people saying, I don't know what they're doing here, or I don't know what their purpose is here. And so that, I think that's very intrusive. And that's another one of the bigger lessons or places that I feel that we've failed folks before. Another place that I feel is, someplace we failed is in setting good boundaries. And so this is important if you consider yourself an empath, if you're a sensitive person and you love to facilitate spaces where you have people of all sorts of personalities and backgrounds come together. It's understanding that it's also part of your responsibility to make sure there is a certain tone in the room, to make sure there's respect for people of different cultures and of different backgrounds, and being able to step in if you don't see that happening. And so I'll just say that there are multiple times that I remember back in my days when I was working in Latin America where we'd facilitate events and someone said something inappropriate and perhaps nobody knew how to react at the time. And so no action was taken. And so it's just important. You take away one message from this call. I want you to take away that taking no action is an action. Making no decision is a decision. And so that's another thing that I thought we have to be more intentional about, and that kind of shaped our way moving forward, where we said we have to do more to be able to respond to these, unruly sort of conversations and to set clear and comfortable boundaries for folks that are in the room. And so from those different issues that we had, the lack of participation from the community, the lack of, I'd say, sensitivity to the different languages spoken in different cultures, lack of sensitivity to the power dynamics that there are, as I mentioned, also between folks of different income within the same culture, and buy-in. So I think all of that inspired me to want to create something a little different in the evaluation space. And so I know that I'm definitely not the first firm. There are wonderful firms out there that are doing culturally responsive evaluation and that are very active in the community and trying to get in all the buy-in and input that they need to. I just know that it was my experiences and that little booklet that I kept of all the good practices and all the times we failed that I used to sort of build out a structure where I felt we could actually have a voice. I thought it was very important for BIPOC to feel comfortable, to shape decision-making, and to be radical in the way that we wanted to see change happen. And so that's very important as far as what sort of started up Play for Change. There were also multiple conversations between my colleagues, other BIPOC folks, who where we really complained and really just tried to heal together around our experiences in the field. And we just had all these ideas that I thought would be great if they came together. So I started a network. I started a database, a large Excel sheet that I hope you never see. And it's not very organized. So in that Excel sheet, I kept track of all the folks in the different continents where I've worked and their expertise, whether they were more qualitative focused or quantitative focused, whatever their expertise or specialty was, I tried to keep it all in one place so that I could know who to bring in for different projects. And now, so this was as far as methods, but also I had an idea of their content area expertise. So there are folks in my database that aren't necessarily evaluators, but they have expertise around gender, they have expertise around water. And so it's just important in creating teams that can meet the needs of organizations in different ways. And so finally that led to Play for Change. And Play for Change, I say our biggest mission, our biggest purpose is to be able to elevate the voices of marginalized communities in doing research and evaluation, strategic planning, and capacity building. And so I try for the most part to implement a model that is not top down. So anytime we have a project and we're looking at coming together and bidding on a new project, we get together and we talk about expectations and who needs to do or would like to do what skills they'd like to develop. Now, I don't necessarily have to facilitate all those meetings. Usually we come together and we say, well, who wants to build this sort of skill and how can we do that so that we can really, create a good and cohesive team together. And so through Play for Change, it's been a very rewarding experience. We started up during a pandemic, which is not a time that most people would choose to start a firm. But we just felt the need for it. And I just felt a calling. I felt a lot of guidance around it. And if anything, the folks who provided feedback to our website and to the services we would provide said, you have to have teeth and nails. You can't be scared of being explicit, of having a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement or racial equity statement. All your clients should know exactly what you're about. And so I remember I did feel this fear. And when I created my business plan, I said, oh, what if organizations that aren't in that space yet, nonprofits or foundations that aren't quite in that space, what if they don't hire me? And I kind of prayed on it. And I felt like the response I heard is, well, I probably don't want to work with them. So I think that's a big thing too, that in a way, taking a stance and saying what you're about and what makes your firm or your projects different from others, there is so much value to that. And if anything, your clients will find you. And so I've, posted blogs or vlogs on white supremacy, on culture responsive evaluation, culture responsive data collection. And then what will happen after is you'll have people reach out and say, hey, I really appreciated that you started this conversation or that you started this talk. Why don't we talk more? And sometimes that can translate into paid work, or sometimes that just translate into a relationship that you're able to have with somebody over time. But regardless of what it turns into, it's very, very valuable. And so from all of this, I think at Play for Change, we've learned some lessons around how to be culture responsive that I'd love to just share with the group. And after that, I'm going to open it up so you all can kind of also give tips, because as I said, it seems like there's a lot of valuable experience in the room, and I'd love to hear what else you all have done to be culturally responsive. And so there are a few things that I think at the top of my head. So the first thing, as I said, if you take away one message, right, not taking a stance is a stance. So first message is take a stance, be brave, have courage. And in order to do that, it means being explicit about what you stand for. And so I think something that's very valuable as consultants that we can do is within our own websites, we can have a statement on racial equity. And this isn't something that you elaborate from one moment to the next, but maybe you get together with your staff, or if it's just you sit down and you take notes in a heart to heart, and you really think through what it means for you to have an equitable culture. and you define that and you write it down, because when you write something down, it means you're held accountable to it, because now the world knows that's what you do. You hope that's what you do or what you believe in. So now you're more likely to do it. So I think number one would be around absolutely having a statement in place. Maybe you already have. And so if you have, make sure you revisit it each year, right? The current events are changing all the time. Like we've seen the killing of many Black folks over the course of our lifetimes, but especially now, a lot of that is getting published in the media. And it's a very sad and disheartening thing that we're seeing. And so we should stand by folks and be able to say, so I would say that would be one of our first things that we can do to be culture responsive. Another clear tip that comes from here is thinking as you're designing your evaluation, the very first thing that I would do is I would just look internally, right? We're past the days of where researchers, evaluators are people that have no external factors that are influencing them. You know, we are not totally neutral. We would like to think we are, but I think that that's a damaging thought. And so another tip then would be to just make sure that you take into account your own identity. Before I do a lot of presentations where I'm doing any sort of capacity building, sometimes I just take a moment and I just say 4 or 5 facts. And I'm like, I grew up in this multicultural home. You know, I was middle income, and today I'm going to talk a lot about poverty. So just understand that, you know, as I come in as a facilitator, as a trainer, you know, that I might not have that sort of sensitivity to those issues that we're discussing. And that's totally fine. It doesn't take away from your experiences. It doesn't make you less credible. If anything, it makes you more aware, more humble, and open to the feedback you can get for the room. So number 2, check yourself, you know, expose your identity. There's nothing to be afraid of at the end of the day. Number 3, I would say, is around people interacting cross-culturally when you're working in other countries, when you're working even here in the US, and you know you're going to do an evaluation of breast cancer in African-American women or a specific community. You know, are you of that community? Have you had those sort of issues? So really look into that. And if you haven't, make sure that you engage folks from that community at every level of your evaluation, from the design, right? You want to bring folks in to be able to inform your evaluation plan, to tell you what's reasonable, what's not, to tell you that the language makes sense, right? You want to involve them in data collection. Maybe it doesn't make sense for you to be the one collecting the data. Maybe it makes more sense and people will feel more comfortable with folks who resemble them a little more. So whatever it is, you have to make adjustments to the evaluation itself based on your feedback from these communities, right? At the analysis stage, a way you can do that, you can either do participatory analysis where you have folks, you know, if we weren't virtual, you could have them in a large room and you could show them some of the data and say, all right, let's make sense of this data together. And there's more techniques there. If you're interested, you can let me know and I'll tell you some more after. Or you can, you know, do sort of a preliminary analysis and then, hey, you know, people who are informing our evaluation, how does this look to you? What do you think? You know, make sure that it's their story that you're telling and not yours, right? And then I would say the reporting piece is also important. A lot of times evaluation and data can go from us as consultants, evaluation consultants, to the organization, to the funder, and the people who provided all the valuable and rich information have no idea what happened, have, you know, no idea of what these results are, or the results are presented in a way that isn't user friendly and that they can do something with it. And so making sure that your reporting is accessible, that it integrates these perspectives, I think is very, very valuable. And yeah, to that extent about understanding culture and bringing in people's cultures and key informants of those cultures into your evaluation, you can also be intentional around the languages. So I love languages and I have made it one of my priorities to learn as many of them as I can throughout my lifetime. But if you're not one of those folks who wants to learn other languages, then do the right thing and bring folks who know those languages in to do a lot of that data collection. You'll get much, much better results and it'll all be worth it in the end. So, whew. With that, I'm going to hand it back to the group. If you guys are already off mic, If you already have taken your mics off, that's great. But if you're silenced, please put your mics on or go ahead and write in the chat. I would love to hear more from all of you. What other tips do you guys have for folks?
Great. And you want to open up the screen?
Let's see. What do you mean?
So that we can see everybody, not just slides.
Absolutely. Maybe. Aha.
That way we can see who wants to talk, who has their hand up, etc.
Yeah, of course. I'm trying to see.
Well, will you do that? Anybody who has a starting question, do you want to
Thinking maybe
put it out?
So I'm going to stop the screen sharing, and that way everyone will appear on the screen.
that
Okay.
sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks, Amber. We
No
need you to
problem.
save here. And you're the one who's generally there to save us. So I think if people have a question, just let's put it out there. And if we need to go by hands, we'll go by hands and I'll call on people. But where would you like to start?
There's some good things in the chat. That might be a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Brian made a couple of comments about the issue of taking a stance. And I think that's a really fascinating issue. And it often means confronting the funder. We're involved in a project right now about Black maternal health, and they don't want to be talking to people of color and the Black moms. And so somehow that's going to have to be confronted early on. And then how do you do that when you're trying to maintain a contract in a business, but it's likely when you know where they're coming from to tick them off. So I like that. That's the issue of taking a stance. You want to comment more on it, Brian? You are the one who put the comments out.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah, just Kamala, you were just saying about taking kind of how like whether it's worth taking a stance or like what situations, and just made me think about recent situation I'm in where more a strategic planning work, but with a organization that's in a more rural, more socially conservative part of the province here, and talking about the truth and reconciliation calls here in Canada with kind of our relationship with Indigenous peoples. And we got some pushback from the board of directors of this one organization, but also kind of emboldened the executive director kind of take a stance too and say, like, you know what, I can see where you're coming from as a board, but this is something that we need to be focusing on. So sometimes the consultant coming in and being that voice of, we believe in this, can encourage some internal voices to speak up to and say, you know what, like I agree with what they're saying. It's a bit more nuanced situation than that, because obviously, once we're done the contract, we're gone, versus the executive director is ideally, staying for some time, but it does maybe open up the space to have those conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have others had similar experiences?
We have that trouble a lot because I'm in Kansas and we have a lot of state partners, and the state as a whole tends to run more conservative than a lot of the work that we would like to do. So I can think specifically of a SAMHSA grant that I was the evaluation task lead for. And so my job was pretty siloed in data analysis, but I worked with the other teams who were doing social media stuff and whatever. And it was basically geared towards youth mental health. And the state refused to put anything on the Facebook page having to do with LGBTQ plus mental health awareness, because at the time Sam Brownback was our governor, and he didn't believe in that. And so we always continued to push it, to send it up but ultimately it was their social media person who either posted it or didn't. And so that's just a recent example, but we do run into that on a fairly regular basis and have to try and navigate what that looks like. And it is situational, it's contextual, right? Like depending on who in the organization you're working with and how they can be a partner or not, it gets tricky and sticky. And we're also sort of like, I work at an institute where my center does evaluation. The institute is nested inside the university. So there's even the university politics on top of the institute politics, on top of the state politics, and it can get messy in a hurry.
I'm just happy to hear that people are doing something though, like Nicole and Brian, like regardless of what the outcome is, I feel like you do your best, right? You do your absolute best. You push as much as you can, and then you have to leave the rest out. But I think that that's a big step in and of itself. I've also seen myself as sort of that underdog too in some situations. And but I totally agree also with what you were saying, Brian, that bringing it up can also help elevate the voices of some folks. And now you have research and data, right? And so I remember with one large faith-based organizations, we did mixed methods evaluation. I'll never forget that one of the larger findings was that staff felt that the culture was very top down. And they mentioned that there was too much of a white American frame. And this was not my choosing of words, but that it is what it is. And so we drafted that in the report as well. And we were asked to take it out of the report. I don't know what they've done with the report since, but we didn't take it out. We were firm and we said, we're sorry, but this is what people said, and this is what people said, and this is data, and this is evidence that supports that claim. And so your organization can choose whether they work with it or not. And so there was someone in that leadership committee who was just so relieved, and in our preliminary analysis meeting just said, see, I've been saying it the whole time. I've always said that that's what we need to do. We need to address the culture. And I'm just happy that they may have felt supported in that time, and hope that they chose to do something with that. But the act itself of bringing it up, of, holding true to your ethics and being able to do it, even if you may not continue to be their evaluator, or they may not continue to contract you again, well, that's really where our role, you have to decide what side of the spectrum you want to be in. And I think it's sounding like some of us here really are on more of that social justice side. That's why we decided to get into the space. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, there's definitely methods I've seen some evaluators use, like the idea of like having data parties, so which is bringing in maybe not the completely raw data, but definitely like, all the comments and all the different, the themes are coming up, and bringing that to the stakeholders, and like, this is what we've been hearing. So it's not that they're getting the report all packaged at the end, but saying like, these are the themes and results we pulled out so far. And yeah, there you go. You got, sniffing people saying that there's a white toxicity happening in the organization. What do you want to do with that? I also know another tip I've heard from some folks is, maybe not for that example, but like running through scenarios in advance, like what if the evaluation brought this up, or what if the evaluation brought that up, just to say, these are things that could be coming up, and how are you, like, proactively, like how would you respond to that, or what would that mean to you? Just being able to have those conversations in advance.
Absolutely. I'm also seeing Emma in the chat. She says that she's often had to say, I'm not going to delete data because it's not what people wanted to hear.
I think that's Nicole.
Oh, Nicole, my mistake. Thanks.
I have a question. It's not about the topic. It's
Yeah, please.
about the title of your business. Why did you choose to start the name of your company with the word play? And how has that affected people's reactions to the company?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I think within a lot of communities of color, research and evaluation has happened in a way that has felt traumatic.
Yeah.
And we assume, I've had conversations with other BIPOC evaluators that a lot of times we assume, oh, well, if we evaluate your program, we're making your life better, right? And so there, right, so there's data collect, which hopefully happens, but doesn't always. And so there's data collection that sometimes happens where we don't give our program participants incentives, even if we've taken a significant amount of their time. And when we do a lot of this data collection in communities of color, it can feel kind of extractive. And so I think a big part of my business model was wanting to make sure that the experience for folks was a good one, was a positive one, to make it fun, to make it engaging. And so it's play for change, because I like the idea of using arts and crafts and games. Like we've done dancing before, all sorts of icebreakers. Sometimes there's even space just to do, you know, a few breathing exercises, a meditation, things that'll relax people and can also kind of nurture these communities. And so it's play for change, because we want to do things a little differently. You know, we want to be intentional in the way that we engage with folks. So I think that was the big part, is the data and what we get from the data is very important, but also the relationships and the experience people have to make sure we don't traumatize people who have already been traumatized. But if anything, just make them feel like they're in a space where they can heal together, where they can be open together and just enjoy. Also, I think that when you play, you tap into a different part of the game, of the brain. See, I'm thinking of games. You tap into a different part of the brain where you could be anybody and you can do anything, and you can do role plays, you know, and you learn more things about each other. If you even think about when you play in your families, you know, with your kids or with your parents, you do board games or you have any sort of game night, you learn things about their personality, and you're in a very relaxed state as opposed to a tense state. And so I think that's something that we look to strive to do within our practice. So, yeah.
It seems to me that this is a real crucial discussion that doesn't often happen in the training of community psychology evaluators. And especially when you're looking at BIPOC issues. And it's a position I've taken as a white evaluator consultant with some ease because the privilege. But I wonder what it's like for other evaluators of color when they confront a system that's putting forth something that's really objectionable, that you know is part of their value system, and you want to confront them. And what are the extra barriers that are faced if you are a BIPOC evaluator versus a white evaluator? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will open it up to folks on the call first, and then I'll respond if there's a lingering silence.
This is Melody here. I'm not an evaluator, but I have bumped up into some of the stuff that you're talking about. So like, you're right, we are over assessed and over evaluated. So in the assessment line of it, thinking about like how can people support communities to centralize all those needs assessments that are done year after year, so that when new people come in to do another needs assessment, we could be, you know, tell them, have a look at these. If you have new questions, ask them, but don't ask us the same things over and over, especially about stuff that can't change within 1 year. And then for the evaluation piece, it's the same thing. You know, what has already been evaluated, and then also what are communities curious about themselves to know, like how do we incorporate those into evaluations? And then if they're sensitive answers, how do we protect those so that people can own their own sort of data and issues until they have a chance to start addressing them themselves.
Melody talked about that with us in her presentation, that as a Native American community, they are constantly bombarded and over-evaluated by all the people who want to get data from them.
And we wonder about the results because being overassessed, people get tired and they don't want to engage with those assessments anymore. And so they'll just do them as quickly as they can when they have to. And then we don't get results.
I like the idea of evaluation focused on use, right? Every data point that we collect will be used. You know, we are doing this because we have an intention around it, because we're going to use this to inform decision making, not just for the sake of collecting it. And you're right, it can feel very extractive, and I'm sorry that you all have had those experiences. Yeah, we have Nicole kind of bringing back what we mentioned earlier around, she hates the fact that plans never include closing the feedback loop with participants and communities. Yeah, that's another thing, right? About making sure that people from different communities actually are able to see that information and use it and share it in a way that makes sense for them.
I'm clearly not a person of color, but I want to mention something that's happened to a couple women I know. One's an evaluator, one does more intervention work, is having their stuff stolen. Or having even one, the foundation, even though she brought to the job things she had developed before she did the work, the foundation claimed that they own that now. And then I had another just contact me as well, another woman who's an evaluator, because people are using her stuff. So I think that's another thing that's happening in our area is people of color having their things stolen by predominantly white institutions and people who feel entitled to just take it.
Thank you, Mary, for joining us. Yeah, that's an awful thing, Susan. It's absolutely unacceptable. You know, when people think of stealing, they only think of it in the traditional sense of, you know, did you steal money? Did you steal resources? But stealing people's intellectual property, that's a horrible, horrible crime.
You know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just, I was going to respond a little more because I remember a question you brought up earlier about what it feels like to try to challenge systems. So when you're within an organization that, let's say, has a very white normative culture, like what does that look like as a person of color trying to affect change or make change happen in a different way within that organization? And so it looks differently for different people, right? I'd say the higher up you are in the organization, the more power that you have, you know, it'll be a little easier to make those changes, you know, even if people are treating you differently based on your race and ethnicity. It would be much harder if you're in one of the lower levels of the organization trying to do that same effort. I have been in both positions, actually. And my process has been to speak directly with leadership first and to make requests, maybe 2 or 3 requests, one being around forming a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee or a racial equity committee within the organization. Another was around having formal training for all members in the organization around racial equity, just so we could all kind of manage the same language. And that would make things a little easier for me. And then a third one was to host regular capacity building within the organization. So for folks who kind of had experience within racial equity, to be sharing that knowledge and sort of lunch and learns in the organization. And so it took a long, windy path. Things didn't happen right away. But I think that the values of the organization were aligned with what we wanted to see. And over time, they eventually did build a committee. And they did bring in consultants to go ahead and do that. I think that they saw that I had a white colleague and a very good friend of mine who helped me in this whole process. The two of us just saw the need for this change. And I remember her saying that she had hoped we'd come farther along, but we were able to accomplish a lot in that time. And I've also been in spaces where I've tried and no significant changes were made. And I just made sure I didn't work for an organization like that in the future. And I would just say, because I know there may be other folks on the call who identify as BIPOC, as you're looking, if you're going to join an organization, you know, let's say you don't decide to have your own firm, some things that you can look out for to see what the culture is like at that levels is, one, try to see if the organization has a racial equity statement somewhere and, you know, what are they doing about it? Two, see within the job description if they have an actual salary posted. I always think that that's a wonderful practice because it shows that an organization is clear and transparent about what they're willing to pay for a certain skill set. I think that when we don't have salaries posted, a lot of times people of color are offered lower salaries for subjective reasons. And in order to avoid something like that, if they don't post it, I always ask directly, how much are you looking to spend on a person? I don't think it's an unreasonable question. If it's the type of organization that would rule you out just for asking, then that's absurd, right? You don't want to waste your time and you definitely don't want to waste their time. And then you can also ask them directly, you know, as they're interviewing you, interview them and ask them, you know, what is the racial makeup of their organization? If they fumble and stumble around and don't have much to say, that's not a very good sign. And, you know, if they say that they're not as racially diverse as they'd like to be, then ask what their plans are for bringing on and retaining staff of color.
Other questions, comments? We're running to 1 o'clock and a number of people are having to run off to meetings, but I'd be glad, and I know that Kamala would be glad to stay on until at least 1:15 if there are people who have other questions.
I don't have a question per se, but I just had a comment. I just thought what you just said was actually really helpful to hear. I think sometimes I agree that those racial equity statements are really important, and having the different committees and commissions on diversity and equity. Sometimes I think my experience or my perception of some of that is that for some organizations, it tends to be very, very performative in terms of like, this is, you know, something we value, but then there's nothing that's done afterwards. So how, I guess maybe the question could be, so how do you push for knowing if they truly are committed to diversity and equity versus saying, you know, we are going to do this, we're going to establish this, we have this commission, you know, we would like you to join this committee, and then nothing ever happens.
Do you mean before you join the organization, as in how do you filter one that is performative as opposed to one that is actually intentional? Or do you mean when you're already in the organization, you didn't realize it and now you realized it and you want to do something about it?
I think, yeah, so I guess already in the organization. So how do you push for them to continue on that trajectory of, you know, like we really are committed to making changes?
That's a great question. I want to open it up to the room first, and then I'll say a few thoughts after.
I guess I'll jump in here. So hey, I guess because I work with a lot of community coalitions and collaboratives, it's, you know, a telltale sign is who's involved in the collaborative. It's one thing to say that we're all about social justice and we're all about equity and inclusion, but if you look around at the steering committee or the members, and that's not representing the community, that's not even a big red flag. That just says it all.
I think also if you're already in the organization and you're not sure how to navigate it, I guess it depends on a lot of things. You know, I'd like to say, I think, you know, if I were in that sort of position, where I have been in that sort of position, I've tried to push on leadership, you know, with all the information in hand. So coming to them with all the documents that they've elaborated or whatever their statement is and saying, this is where we say we are. I feel like we need these steps in order to actually get there, you know, and start that conversation and see what happens around all of that. Now, mind you, the only reason why I say it would be great to do that is it also depends what kind of position you're in. Are you in a place where you feel like you're okay with, you know, risking your job, right? Because that's also what happens when you're kind of radical in your thinking and you want to stand up for those beliefs, right? And so I would like to say that you should always advocate for holding your organizations accountable for what they're saying they're doing in terms of racial equity. But I know that, you know, if finances are an issue or if having that stability of that job at the moment is an issue, then there are other ways that you can kind of be more suggestive and less of an organizer. The way we've gone about it is really just organizing, doing some hard community organizing. And thankfully I wasn't fired, but my friend was. And so, yeah, I won't say it comes without risks.
And organizing is just a way of saying building allies.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a form of it, which is to find out who else in the organization will stand with you. And, you know, one of the easiest ways to do this is to just ask questions and, you know, let the answers sink the organization itself. But, you know, at some point it'll come to confrontation and you don't want to do that alone.
Yeah, one of the questions a friend of mine asked some of you, well, if you were at the conference, you heard her keynote, Palami Prescott Adams often asks when she's working in communities to see the salaries of all of the staff. Because that's very telling right there. Some are willing and some are not.
Other questions and comments? This has been wonderful because it is really a very personal view of what it's like to be in that position. And I think we often talk about this stuff more theoretically. And let's see.
Oh, yeah, we have another.
Let's see. Davida has a question, and Davida always has interesting questions. Do you want to voice this, Davida? I guess not.
Sorry, sorry. No, I was just saying Tom, you talked about, you know, asking questions. And I said that my problem has come from asking all the right questions to all the wrong people. And unfortunately, the people that I asked the questions to were people who were very comfortable with the status quo. So quickly, you know, your name, that's where you begin to, you walk right into the cesspool, shall I say. So I've learned to assess the culture first, and that can take a minute, because you're showing up and, you know, in certain, with a certain title, first of all, makes people begin to question how you got there. You know, who are your allies? What even puts you in that place? So I say in all things, protect yourself, because these positions can, you know, I mean, when you're authentically going in to do the job, these can put you at risk. And, you know, and protecting your reputation is very important. And if you find that, I'm saying always look for an exit strategy too. And when you start asking the questions, and I'm saying this from lived experience working in government, you know, you're asking all the right all the right questions, and you know, and a lot of times your your reputation precedes you. So you're the perfect person to bring in because you come with a certain level of trust that the community already has that was not there before. You want to make sure that you protect that. So I've learned the hard way that even though I know some things, I don't always have to voice it. Just study the culture of the environment because it's been wrong long before you got there. And it's not going away just because you're there. But do what you can when you're there. And I agree. What you come up with is what you come up with. But and don't change anything, because in the end, your reputation is what you walk in with, and you want to be able to walk away with it too.
Great.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
That may be a wonderful place where we can stop. You certainly stimulated an incredible discussion. And you sort of think about, you know, when students are being trained in evaluation, they need to listen to this, because this is what it's really like. It isn't like, oh, you gather the data, you present the feedback, and they change. You know, this is the nitty gritty of what it's like. And I think you did a beautiful job of presenting it, and greatly appreciate your willingness to come join us.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, be at the table.
Great. Well, thank you. And as I said, October 29th, Kelly Kiddison, who's very high up in HHS, will join us. And November 12th, Teresa Armstead, who's at CDC. So we have two fascinating ones ahead of us. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Kamala. It's been great.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.